I don't know what to say in introduction to you, Busho. I bet it's been 15 years ago. The House of Prayer was meeting in the little or the big old mansion next to St. Mark's Cathedral on Monday nights. And there was this handsome young man, Marty, who would come in to sit and meditate with us. And over time, I started conversations with Marty, and we had this great conversation. He told me part of his story, that he had been raised a Christian, but as a teenager, he had discovered Buddhism and was now a practicing Buddhist. But he came to sit with us because we were just down the road, and so we had a great relationship. Over time, Marty began to share his life and his journey with me, and I was able to be there for his ordination to the priesthood, the Buddhist priesthood. And Marty I asked him to come and share his story with us and to teach. And what I came to know about Busho, because his name was changed during this time, was the depth of his own spirit and his own honesty of his own search. And that for me has been, over the years, the great joy of working with Busho. So he became a partner of mine. I often called him a Christian Buddhist. And it was meant to be a compliment, not that, it was just that Busho was able to bridge the gap between us in such a beautiful way that really made Christianity and Buddhism fit like a puzzle in some ways, which I think all traditions do if we can see it from the right point of view, that there's enough there between us that we can start talking each other's language and share that bridge. So I'm just delighted that Busho's here with us tonight to share the story for us of a Buddhist mystic, and great to be here with you tonight, Busho.
Always.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Feels weird to use a podium. Is this okay for you guys?
You don't have to use it. It's up to you.
No, I sort of feel professorial. I think. Okay. Can all of you folks up there in Collegeville hear me okay? You can hear and see me?
They're waving.
Hi, you guys. Aren't they cute? Look at them sitting up there. That's Tom. Hi, Tom. Hi, Mary. Oh, look at him. Oh, this is great. Okay. So thank you, Ward. He remembers my story, I think, better than I do. I miss my old name sometimes, you know. So yes, I have been, what did I hear somebody say? Oh, I was at Augsburg. I'm one of the interfaith fellows at Augsburg University here in the cities, and somebody said they were blessed with multiple belongings. Isn't that a cool turn of phrase? Multiple belongings. I went, oh, I'm one of those people. I didn't go looking for it, but I feel so much at home when I'm hanging out at the House of Prayer, and I feel so much at home when I'm hanging out at the Zen Center. I kind of forget that I'm a person who's blessed with multiple belongings. Isn't that nice? So yes, I have been blessed to have been hanging out with House of Prayer folks, House of Prayer teaching, House of Prayer spiritual sensibility for probably a decade and a half or so. As Ward said, the super romantic reason that I sought out Christian contemplative prayer was because it was 3 blocks from my house. So I'm not sure how lofty that actually is, but when I walked into House of Prayer in the city, back when it was on Oak Grove Street, the space looked very much like the one it does here, just a bunch of black zafus and zabutons, sitting on the floor, chant, sit, walk, sit, chant, and leave. And I went, oh, well, it just saves me taking the bus to sit on the floor on black zafus and zabutons and chant and sit and walk and sit and chant and leave. Wow. What I don't think I knew then, and I don't know that I know the depth of it ever, but I don't think I knew at that time how large the invitation, the actual spiritual invitation was of that experience. I am from the cities and I was raised Catholic. And although I was raised Catholic, I was never exposed in any way to mystical understandings or mystical traditions, even though a lot of what we consider to be Christian mysticism would, at least on the surface, take place within the Catholic expression of Christianity. And I'd kind of heard in passing of St. Teresa of Avila or John of the Cross or whatever, but only when they're doing that reading of all the names. Does that make sense? So to discover in my, I guess, mid-30s or so, that there were teachings that we were chanting before sitting at the House of Prayer that felt very much like what I would have called Zen was shocking to me. I mean, my world got really quite big. What Ward was kind enough to exclude from his story is how often I would pester him after the sits and go, so hold on a minute, who's the da-da-da-da-da? And how does that relate to da-da-da-da-da? And how come the, right? Because this whole thing was kind of breaking open for me. My understanding of what the Christian path was only the very, very surface of these are the things, and like the creed, right? That you stand and recite. Like that's the thing, that's the box. That's the fenced in yard that we all get to play in. And that's as far as it will go. So it felt to me like I was 1,000 miles away from that. And I would never have defined myself as a Christian Buddhist or a Buddhist Christian because I didn't think I belonged anymore. I mean, in my heart of hearts, although it was never spoken, I felt cast out, actually. Oh, you're not doing that anymore then, right? You've probably been to masses, funeral masses or wedding masses where it's like, yeah, you can come up and get the body of Christ if, then they've got that little line in there about if you're in good standing with the sacraments or da-da-da-da-da. And there's that impression that there's a gate, and there's a door of some kind, there's some sort of velvet rope around the sacred. So to discover the Christian mystics and the Jewish mystics and the Muslim mystics and the Taoist mystics and the Buddhist mystics, you know, this really became for me the beginning of, I think I would call it a love affair with mystical teaching because it moved me so deeply. And it was right around the time that I was getting to know Ward in the House of Prayer that my spiritual director said, I think you're ready for Rumi. And I went like, you mean like more space in my apartment? Like, are you saying, that's such a cheap joke. Anyway, she rarely does this, but she did the lean forward with the index finger thing that, you know, grown-ups do. On your way home tonight, you're going to stop at the bookstore on Nicollet Mall, and I want you to buy a copy of The Essential Rumi, translated by Coleman Barks. I want you to buy that book. And then when I see you again in 2 weeks or a month or whatever it was, we'll have a conversation about what that does to you. And I suspect it did for me what I suspect that type of teaching does for a lot of us when we're really ready for it, is it kind of just blows the doors off of what we had imagined the boundaries of not only our tradition are, but the boundaries of the heart, right? I'd never read words like that. I'd never heard God described that way. I'd never heard anybody who was writing from that kind of place before, right? Until I remembered the book that I read when I was 22 years old called The 3 Pillars of Zen. Got me in lots of trouble. I discovered Zen in my early 20s, and I fell very much in love with it. And I went downtown Minneapolis to a scary neighborhood called Uptown. That's where we are right now, I know, very close anyway. And I went to a very strange building called the Minnesota Zen Meditation Center, which is very strange. And I met a very strange man who was wearing essentially pajamas with no hair. Can you imagine? And I bought from him an official black cushion, which I took home and devotedly sat on for probably 2 weeks before I decided forget it, right? That's pretty good. I mean, 2 weeks, every day for 2 weeks before you decide forget it. For somebody in their early 20s, thumbs up. My point here is what I touched, although I was not at that time able to stay with it, had the potential, at least for me, to plant really small, very deep seeds. I think that's what the mystics do for a lot of us. I would never claim to understand. I would only claim to sort of orbit that teaching, that verse, that poem, that sutra. And I would hope that as time goes on, my orbit becomes a little closer and a little closer, and that the wisdom of what's being expressed by that flaming heart can work its way down into me a little more deeply. That's my hope with all the mystics. I was telling Dan last year during Holy Week, I spent 2 weeks in Avila studying St. Teresa, of course, and St. John of the Cross, also spent time there. And reading a lot of her stuff, especially in the interior castle. It's difficult, as some of that material is. I found myself back in that same place again, of feeling like I was at home. So what we're going to do tonight is we're going to talk about somebody called Bodhidharma. Some of you may recognize the name, and some of you I'm sure do not. I chose somebody in the Buddhist tradition, of course, because that's sort of my stomping grounds more often than not these days. And last time I was here, I talked about Dogen, who is an actual historical human being. He actually lived, and he walked on the earth. But when I was invited back again, I thought I'll go all the way back to the very, very beginnings. And the very, very beginnings, as far as the story of Zen Buddhism, starts with what's almost certainly a mythological character. He's probably a composite of a bunch of different teachers and a bunch of different teachings. And we sort of need something to do with those things and a person to pin them on. So we create a character called Bodhidharma. There are those who would argue he actually lived. There are certainly statues that are erected that are said to be in his likeness. Whatever. Doesn't matter. I kind of like in fact, I was telling my friends at Zen Center this tonight. I said, I'm heading over to the House of Prayer. Oh, what are you talking about? Oh, Bodhidharma. And they went, oh, it's great to talk about Bodhidharma because he's like a cartoon character. You can say whatever you want. No one can say you're wrong. Yeah, I guess that's kind of true. I'll try not to abuse my privileges. So I'm going to alternate a little bit between kind of the philosophy and the teaching of Bodhidharma and kind of some historical stuff, because I know some of you are interested in the history. I am not a scholar. And luckily for all of us, perhaps, we live in an age where factual information is readily available to many, many of us on this thing called the internet. So if you're interested in Bodhidharma, Google him. There are books written. There are people who have studied this stuff for all of their adult lives who would know more and more and more than I would ever know. What I'm mostly interested in is what he represents. What he represents in what I think of as the universal spiritual path. And kind of like Ward said, I'm very much a proponent in the idea that at the core of all of our great faith traditions is an experience that somebody had or somebody is having, or a place of apprehension in the human heart that is available to all of us. And we call that a mystical experience. And that the further away we get from that mystical experience, the more different our traditions appear to be. And that's cool. Different times, different countries, different cultures. But I'm very much, and the more I sit and the more I practice, the more this becomes very, very evident. That at the core of all these traditions is somebody having a direct apprehension. And then through their culture, through their language, through that faith, trying to express what this thing is, right? So whether that's Moses climbing the mountain and seeing the flaming bush, or Christ emerging from the River Jordan after his 40 days, or whether that's Buddha sitting underneath the Bodhi tree, this is the cracking open, right, of a human mind, a human heart. And by definition, that is a boundaryless, I don't know, non-dual, whatever fancy word we want to use to describe an experience. And then it's filtered, of course, right, through the culture and through the understanding, through the gender and through the age and all that kind of stuff until we get these very, very different traditions. What I like about Bodhidharma, and so I'll launch here a little bit into the history, what I like about him is he probably is a composite character. He probably is a myth. And what I like about that is it allows us to inject into that personage or into that story, the key qualities that this tradition called Zen Buddhism thinks are essential. Does that kind of make sense? I mean, people are complicated and we've got layers and, you know, dark sides and light sides and areas of understanding and areas of unconsciousness. When we're creating a character, it's almost like we're given the artistic license to allow them to embody and imbue everything we're wanting them to. You know, we do this anyway. Whenever I hear stories about, you know, the Buddha said blah, blah, I'm like, really? Really? 2,500 years ago, nothing written down for 500 years, and you're telling me he said it that way? Are you sure about that? You're sure that's just not what we've all collectively agreed needed to come out of the mouth of the character that we imagine to be the teacher, right? So what I like about Bodhidharma is his kind of cartoonishness. That's my word. It feels to me very much a reaction that would have been created hundreds of years afterwards. Like, this is who we need this guy to be, right? So the first thing he is he is purportedly, and this is the story now, he is the person, as if it's only one, but he is the person who takes Indian Buddhism, and not just Indian Buddhism, but the secret, magical, inexpressible core of Indian Buddhism, the magic, you know, the real deal. He's the one who carries that to China. So he becomes the first ambassador, so to speak, of the essence of Buddhism, right? Buddhism's already been in China because it's followed the Silk Road. You guys know your history? I don't. Somebody told me there's a thing called Silk Road that trade, you know. Should have gone to college. I was sitting on a cushion. Anyway, Buddhism's already been in China for 100 years, at least, a couple hundred years maybe. In fact, the emperor, one of the main provinces, Wu, we'll get to him in a minute, has already been a convert. He's already been ordaining people and building monasteries. Right? So Buddhism is already there, at least tentatively. And yet we still need somebody to take the magic, inexpressible core, the truth of Buddhism. And so one person carries it. So he is of Indian descent. His name, Bodhidharma, compound word, 2 parts, Bodhidharma. This would not have been his birth name. This would have been his Buddhist name. He was probably born, you know, Rufus Smithbergsky or something. And then when he ordained, he was given by his, well, yeah, most of the Sanskrit versions imagine Rufus Smithbergsky. That's just conjecture. We don't know. But his ordaining teacher, a lot of what I say is not true. His ordaining teacher would have seen something in him and given him the name Bodhidharma. So Bodhidharma, Bodhi is awakening. Awakening, Bodhi, B-O-D-H-I, Bodhi. It comes from the same root in actually both Sanskrit and Pali as Buddha. Buddha, the one who woke up, Bodhi, awakening. So similar. And Dharma, D-H-A-R-M-A, is, in this case, teaching. Teaching or path. So he's an enlightening teacher. He's an enlightening teaching, Bodhidharma. So he's the one who takes the essence of what we want to call Zen to China. So why is this important? Well, what's important is the thing that we now call Zen is really it's kind of a mixed marriage. It's kind of the child of a mixed marriage. The mom we're going to call Chinese Taoism, and the dad we're going to call Indian Buddhism. And they hang out for a couple hundred years, and then this thing starts to fuse, and it becomes this thing that we now speak of as a distinct stream, a distinct entity called Zen or Chan Buddhism. The reason I'm saying it's a child of 2 parents is when we read early Zen texts, early Zen sutras or scriptures, the Taoist influence is so unmistakable. There's no other possible explanation. In fact, in early Zen texts, Buddha is represented with the character, the kanji, Chinese character Tao. They're like, how do we translate this word you keep using, Buddha? What does that mean? Well, you know, big, you know, wake up, see. Oh, we got that, Tao. And so Buddha Tao, Buddha Dharma became one thing. And if you read Shuangzi and you read Lao Tzu and you read early Zen teachers, almost indistinguishable. It's amazing to me how this culture Oh, please.
Will you just say that again? Mom is who and dad is who?
Mom, Chinese Taoism, Taoism. They don't usually have a chapter on Taoism and comparative religions, I notice. When I'm teaching at schools and stuff, I'm like, do you guys have a chapter on Taoism? They're like, no. I'm like, oh man, it's a bummer because it's so user-friendly, don't you think? For those of you who've spent time with the Tao Te Ching, you're like, come on, that is good stuff. Oh, it's just a hot tub. It's so comfy to get in it, and there's so much it shows you. I tell you. He said Taoism was like a hot tub. So the mom is Chinese Taoism, and the dad is Indian Buddhism, Theravada traditional Indian Buddhism. So on your handout, now I realize those of you in Collegeville do not have handouts. I just handed out tonight a handful of quotes from Bodhidharma, so I'll just read them to you so you're not left out. And then I handed out $100 bills. I'm sorry, I can't get those to you, but that's just the way it is. Sometimes you make it, sometimes you don't. So I'll read this first, so you guys are up to speed up there in Collegeville. Here's our history. Bodhidharma was a Buddhist monk who lived during the 5th or 6th century. That's probably pretty close. We had a scholar who gave some teachings at Zen Center who thought that was off by about 200 years, and he dated it more like 300, but that shows you the range that we're playing with here. But this is the origin of what we now call Zen, 5th century, so the 400s and the 500s. He is traditionally credited as the transmitter of Chan or Zen Buddhism to China and is regarded as its first Chinese patriarch or ancestor. According to Chinese legend, he also began the physical training of the monks at Shaolin Monastery that led to the creation of Shaolin Kung Fu. Isn't that weird? So if you go to Karate Center, sometimes there's a big altar to Bodhidharma, and you're like, wow, that's so different than our version of him. I have no idea how those things fuse. Isn't that interesting? But anyway, that's one of the things. Little contemporary biographical information on Bodhidharma is existent, and subsequent accounts become layered with legend and unreliable details. Hence my poetic license tonight. According to the principal Chinese sources, Bodhidharma came from what's called the Western regions, which refers to Central Asia, but may also include the Indian subcontinent. So we make the assumption, India, because of his name being Sanskrit, but we're even guessing about that. Throughout Buddhist art, Bodhidharma is depicted as an ill-tempered, profusely bearded, wide-eyed, non-Chinese person. He is referred to as the blue-eyed barbarian in Chan texts. Isn't that brilliant? Bodhidharma's teachings and practice centered on meditation and in particular, the Lankavatara Sutra, which that's way too divergent a side road to take tonight, but you'll sort of see the flavor of it when we get to the readings. He's referring there to the teaching in Buddhism of consciousness only. The anthology of the Patriarchal Hall, which is a long list of names of teachers and students, identifies Bodhidharma as the 28th patriarch of Buddhism in an uninterrupted line that extends all the way back to Gautama Buddha himself. So, in my imagination, and I have a feeling I'm close, we have a thing called Zen that's a couple hundred years now have passed. Let's say it's the 700s, let's say it's the 800s. By now, we've got a school of Buddhism that's starting to have its own sort of way of doing things. It has a sense of its identity, right? You know, like House of Prayer sort of feels like House of Prayer. You have a sense of what to expect here. It has its own kind of family feel, right? It's different than when you go to Mass, and it's different than when it's still under the same umbrella, but it's got its own particular flavor, right? So by now, Zen has its own kind of particular flavor. A body of teachings, a body of teachers, some stories are starting to come up. But this is Chinese culture, and I'm by no means an expert in Chinese culture, but I am told repeatedly there's a very strong cultural need for connection to ancestry. That's a big deal, they tell me. So if one becomes ordained, or one chooses to become a nun or a monk, who your teacher is, and who your teacher's teacher is, and who your teacher's teacher's teacher is, starts being a really big deal. So Zen, in order to legitimize itself as actual honest-to-God Buddhism, we're not just making this up, we're real. I'm just imagining that being the emotion. Oh my God, you guys, we're making this up. We got to figure out a way. So let's say that your teacher's 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 teacher was Bodhidharma, and his teacher was Prajnatara, and before that was this person, this person, this person, this person, this person, going all the way back to the Buddha sitting underneath the tree. And so to this day, in my case, when I took the precepts and was given the name Busho, I was given a lineage, I don't know if you guys can see it up there, I was given a lineage document that's about 4 feet tall that says Buddha, Mahakashyapa, Ananda, 28 names. That's why he's the 28th ancestor. Before all of those names stop being Sanskrit and start being Chinese and unpronounceable, by the way. And then we go through 22 generations of Chinese names. And then suddenly they turn into Japanese names. They're slightly more pronounceable, but not much. However many generations it is, another 26 or something like that, I think, until finally they start becoming American names. Right? I'm a second generation American Zen student, right? So 100 years from now, there'll be Rufus and, you know. So what is my point? My point is they needed to say this is an unbroken lineage. We are the real deal. So the Buddhism that's already been here in this country, that's fine and good, but you missed the point. Because the Buddhism that existed in the country at that time was mostly devoted to rule following, or precepts following in this case, and, this is a biggie, the accruing of merit. There's a thing called merit in Mahayana Buddhism. If you do something good, you get merit. It's like gold bricks in heaven is what my grandma used to call it. Like, and if you're good to your sister, you get a gold brick in heaven, right? And so later, when you pull her hair, that goes away. So the whole point is it's like a bank account, right? But when you die, if you're, you know, if you're in the black, you're okay. If you're in the red, do you sort of get it? So I'm playing fast and loose, but merit is actually not that different from this. Because remember that at the core of this tradition is this idea that when you're died, you're not done. You know you're not done, right? You're not going anywhere. You're right back again. You're right back again. You're right back again. Because we have this thing called reincarnation. You'll eventually get off the wheel. We all do. You'll be Buddha. But it takes a while. It takes a long time. Several thousand kalpas. Right? A kalpa is it's like an almost infinite amount of time. It shows up a lot in Buddhist scripture, Kalpa. It's the amount of time it takes if there's a single eagle and it flies over the summit of Mount Everest and it's dangling in its beak a long piece of silk. And as it flies over the tip of Mount Everest, the silk ever so gently brushes against the peak of the mountain. One kalpa will be when that mountain's worn down. So after several thousand kalpas, you will be, you get a sense of the time here, right? Wow, if you're goal-oriented, it's a little discouraging. So anyway, so much of the Buddhism in that country at that time was about, I'm going to do good things to accrue merit so that when I die and I come back, I'm born at a higher station. Right? This is an expression of the understanding in the because Buddhism comes from Hinduism much the way Christianity comes from Judaism, right? It just inherits a lot of those old ideas. And so even though the Buddhist system rejected the caste system, said not a chance, we're taking everybody. No, 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 no. And even though the Buddha was very clear about his teaching of karma, you get to change your karma. Joni's karma is hers and Dan's karma is his, and he gets to change it in this very life. There was still the idea that, well, we kind of believe that. But the truth is you're going to want an awful lot of good merit. So that when you die, you don't come back as a toilet brush. You come back as somebody farther along. I'm just taking the stuff from the scriptures, you guys. So, okay? So that's why we need this myth. That's why Zen so desperately needs this myth that there was somebody who took the truth. you sort of feel like the exclusivity of that, like how we all need to be like the special. I don't know, it just feels so human to me. Like, yeah, you guys are great. It's so cute that you try, but we're the ones, right? And that's what it feels like to me. So we've got this guy who's the one who takes the truth. Yeah, please.
So this tradition of Buddhism that was in China already because of the Silk Road.
Yeah, yeah.
Is it fair to say you're saying that didn't follow the lineage of teachers?
Yeah, in fact, they don't have a lineage.
Aha.
No lineage.
So this is where it's almost like Bodhidharma, like spins them on their head.
We need this guy because he's our connection. And it's really weird when I get together with other Buddhists, which doesn't happen as often as I would like, but if I'm hanging out with a Shambhala, Buddhist, somebody who's trained in the Tibetan tradition, or mainstream Mahayana, which is closer to what we see in Chinese culture, or even very traditional Theravada, who your teacher is, who your teacher's teacher is, doesn't even come up. Like, who cares? What difference does it make? Isn't that interesting? And I kind of actually identify with that. I had to sort of be trained to think that way. Because even as a kid, it's like, oh, you're Catholic. Yeah, I'm Catholic. Where do you go? St. Ed's. I would never be asked, like, so who's your priest? Who's your priest's priest? Where did he go to seminary? Be like, what? Who cares? What are you talking about? There wasn't a sense of, like, there being a certain lineage. Does that make sense? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to teach, or I'm going to give you this very short teaching from Bodhidharma's teacher. And then we're going to move into China. I'm bringing this in for two reasons. Bodhidharma's teacher in India, there's a greater chance this person actually existed, if that makes sense. It's funny how historical records have these big blank spots. The second thing that I think is fascinating about this is not only does this short verse, I think, inform everything that he taught, and therefore Zen, but there's a pretty good chance, modern scholarship is showing us now, as of I think this generation, there's a pretty good chance she was a woman and was later changed into a man because, heaven forbid, right? And the Buddhist list of ancestors, so that long list I was telling you about, we chant those every Saturday morning during our long liturgy at Zen Center. Chant every one of them. Boom, 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 all the way down the list. Men, 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 every one of them.
How many?
82 or something generations, I think it is. And we all know women were practicing. They were part of the Sangha that the Buddha taught. We know they were wide awake. We would use the word enlightened. Female teachers. None of it was recorded. So we don't have a sense of their lineage. We don't have a sense of who teachers and students were. And of course, we understand why that is now, because our culture is waking up to the fact, yeah, we've really gone out of our way sometimes to make sure that these people remain faceless and nameless. And that has all sorts of emotional import for me. So again, that's not the point of our conversation tonight, but one of the things that moved me very deeply when I first went to Zen Center was seeing women ordained, wearing the robe. And I didn't know, I actually didn't, you know how you don't know what you don't know? I didn't know until that experience that, of course, all I had ever seen as a Catholic, the priest is always a man. And it doesn't stand out as odd until you see a woman wearing vestments or a robe and go, oh, is that possible? And the way I experienced that was, oh, I could actually sort of feel the absence. Does that make sense? Of what I had never seen all of those years. So like, oh, right? So I love the idea, and of course, we'll never know, but I love the idea that his teacher was a woman. I really like that idea. American Zen is going very far out of its way. We can do more, but very far out of its way to now hand out, when somebody is ordained, a second lineage chart. We don't know all the names because they're never written down, but here's all the ones we do know. Here's some fictional ones. Here's some that kind of stuff, as a way of at least acknowledging we know at least this, and we know that this refers to much that we don't know. Yeah. So anyway, here's the verse. It is only 4 lines, and this is purportedly from Bodhidharma's teacher, Prajnatara. Prajna means the wisdom that goes beyond wisdom. It's a little bit like gnosis. This is not on your sheet, I'm afraid, because I just thought of it tonight, and I printed it out. She said, well, she was asked, why don't you study sutras, Mrs. Teacher Pants? A sutra. Thank you, Kathy. A sutra roughly translates as a scripture. A scripture? The Hindu tradition, the yogic tradition uses the word sutra a little different than we do. Sutra in traditional Buddhism would be something that was really actually spoken by the Buddha. You know those Bibles that have like everything Jesus actually said in red? It'd be that, like only the red bits would count as a sutra in traditional Buddhism, right? In a broader sense, it refers to just scripture. And in the Zen, again, in the Zen tradition, oh man, we blew that word wide open. It can mean any number of things now. It comes from the same root in Sanskrit as the word we use today, suture. Sutra, suture, it means to sew together. Isn't that cool? Oh, I just think it's so cool. Like, oh, it's something sewn together. Wow, that's cool. So anyway, in what would become a hallmark of Zen, she spends very little time studying the scriptures and memorizing the scriptures and reciting the scriptures, She has this sense, the truth can't be written down, there's got to be something else. But she's a non-sutra teacher, which is a dangerous thing for Buddhists to be. It'd be like priests saying, yeah, I never really read that book. What do you call it? Bible? That'd be a pretty dangerous priest, right? Oh my God, they might have direct apprehension. And so they asked her, hey, you, Mrs. Teacher Pants, why do not you teach or read sutras? And her answer has become kind of a poem. When I inhale, I don't dwell upon things. When I exhale, I don't pursue thoughts. And thus I breathe the sutra as it isness hundreds of thousands of millions of times. So she just called her breath the sutra. She doesn't need to recite it. She's breathing it all of the time. And the name of that sutra is as it isness. This. As it is. No extra ideas, no extra layers, no forced meanings, nothing referring beyond itself, nothing symbolic, immediate. It's your breath. That's it. You can imagine why she was dangerous, right? You'll notice I'm referring to her with the female pronoun. Isn't she cool? So this is what Bodhidharma brings to China. Tea break.
Will you say that one more time?
Sure. Isn't it cool?
It's beautiful.
I know, it's so cool. She's so cool. If you Google it, you'll find it. Prajnatara is her name, his name, Prajna, Prajna. Pra is kind of like pre in our language. It means before, and Jna, jhana, it means, wisdom. So Prajnatara, T-A-R-A, Prajnatara. Prajna in its most literal sense means wisdom that comes before wisdom. So it's roughly analogous to gnosis as opposed to knowing. Does that make sense? Like, oh, Patricia, do you know my phone number? She'll say, yeah, 612, right? But that's a different type of knowing than gnosis, is direct apprehension. We've got the very same thing in Buddhism, the difference between wisdom, don't pull the tiger's whiskers, and prajna, which is the perfection of wisdom that comes before you knew it. It's inherent, right? That's why her name, Prajnatara, at least from my point of view, means sutras are great, but they would still come second. So she sticks with the sutra as it isness in the form of, it reminds me so much of what we do when we're sitting. if we think of breath as spirit. It's like, wow, that's pretty direct. So when Bodhidharma crosses the river to go into China, the first thing I think is interesting is that he crosses the river on a reed. Isn't that great, you guys? Come on, that's so cool. Does that remind you of anybody we know? It's this close to walking on water. Oh, he had a reed. Okay, he had a reed. But there's these great paintings of this big guy with this big, sort of a pack over his back on the stick. You know when you ran away from home when you were a kid and you had the long stick and the little bundle? He's got that. But he's bearded and he's got his big thing and he's cranky and he's got a big earring. Oh, man. If it was today, he'd be like pierced and tattooed up and he's just a ne'er-do-well, right? With blue eyes, which is crazy in China, and a red beard. So he's on purpose antithetical. He's like the perfect anti-Chinese stereotype. And that to me actually feels important. Like he's our founder and he's not of us. Isn't that interesting? You'd think they'd go out of their way to do the opposite. But all the Zen literature, koans and that kind of stuff, always talk about him as being, oh, the red-bearded barbarian. And they sort of almost chide him like, oh, he was uncouth and cranky and disagreeable. And all the stories portray him as scowling and being nasty. And they're like, oh, he's kind of groovy, right? So he crosses over into China on a reed, and so they show him standing on this little reed. It's like, come on, just say he's walking on water. We all know where you're going. So he is invited because he is very famous. He is Bodhidharma, the great Indian meditation master. And he is invited by the Emperor Wu, to meet with him. And so he does. And their meeting is the very first koan, which is to say teaching story, in what's now called the Blue Cliff Record. It's arguably the most famous of all koan collections. Even non-Buddhists, at least some of us know the word koan is a story that at first doesn't seem to necessarily make normal sequential sense, that we're invited to sit with because it'll start to show us stuff. I feel the same way about Rumi's poetry. Usually there's one layer, but then there's another layer, and there's another layer, and that thing that you've been chanting works on you, and 10 years later you go, oh, maybe that's what he meant. So the very first koan in the oldest existent Zen koan collection, the Blue Cliff Record, is the meeting of Bodhidharma and the Emperor of China. Dun, dun, dun. So their conversation goes, roughly speaking, like this. The emperor says, I have ordained many Buddhist monks. This is on your handout. I have built many monasteries. I've had many sutras copied, and I have commissioned many Buddha images. How much merit have I earned? You can see it coming, right? Isn't that cool? You can see it coming. Like you just know what's going to happen. Because you feel it? Like, I've done this and this and this. And what I'm really asking is, just tell me how awesome I am, right? Here's my track record, right? You're the official dude all the way from India. Come on, give me some, right? I've just met with my own teachers over the years in that same place so many times that I sort of recognize, like, oh yeah, well, my 30-day silent retreat went well, didn't say a thing. This is the part where you tell me I'm good, right? Right? I hope we can all identify with this, yeah. Okay, so here's our emperor. I've done all this stuff. How much merit have I earned? Bodhidharma. No merit. Like, okay, this started getting interesting. Well, what is the highest meaning then of your holy truth? Vast emptiness, nothing holy. Poor emperor, this stopped being fun for him. So he's lost his patience, I imagine, and asks his third and final question, well, then who are you? Or who is standing before me? And the answer from Bodhidharma is, I don't know. So that is placed, that story, versions of that story are placed number 1 in the Zen koan collection. On the surface, I just think it's a funny story because the guy who wants his candy gets the opposite of candy. That's funny. And yet that story is said to contain, and it's obviously an apocryphal story, this would almost never have possibly happened that way. It's making key points about how Buddhism understands the contemplative path, the spiritual path, the meditation path, the kenotic path, whatever it is that we call what it is that we do together, right? And the very first thing is, you're looking for credit for this? And I see that in myself all the time. I'm still looking for merit, even if I don't call it merit. The part of us that goes to the cushion asking something of it. Does that make sense? I mean, that makes so much sense to me. It's hard for me to imagine religious practice outside of that. That's why you go to church, to be seen at church, so that you know I went to church. It's like I ticked the box today, you know. Did you spend your half hour on the cushion? I spent my half an hour on the cushion. And whether I'm literally actively hoping for more peace, more presence, fewer thoughts, a more open heart, more compassion, a longer fuse from my irritating coworker who picks her teeth, right? I'm still in an acquisitional state of heart. Does that make sense? I'm doing it, but I'm doing it to get something. So one way of talking about this is transactional spiritual practice. I'll give you this, but I need that. I'll give you a half an hour every day sitting in that weird black cushion, but I want fill in the blank. So if it's not merit, it's all the stuff I said. I don't know, fewer thoughts or longer fuse, or there's still on some level an exchange. Do you sort of feel it? Wow, so Bodhidharma was like, not doing it. Wow. Second question is really dangerous. Really dangerous. Keep in mind as we're having this conversation, we're looking at an English language translation of all this stuff. So there's all sorts of subtext. If this was in Chinese, if this was in Pali, if this was in Sanskrit. Does that make sense? So I don't want to go too nuts here, but the word holy in Zen is loaded, just like it is in our Christian tradition. And so one of the places that most of the people who have talked to me about this koan take this is, well, then what's the highest meaning of your holy truth? Come on, Mr. Holy Pants, Mr. Bodhidharma Pants, Mr. Cross the River on a Reed, who's just told me I got nothing for all of my millions of dollars that I've spent. What's the highest meaning of your holy truth? Emptiness. No holy. I'm taking away both those toys for you. There's no highest, there's no holy. The reason I say that's dangerous, especially in a room of people who probably would self-identify as Christian practitioners, to take away the idea of holy, can you feel it? It feels dangerous. The reason this feels so important, and the reason this teaching has been held so highly for so long in the Zen tradition, is the understanding is, as soon as there is a holy, you know the ending of the sentence. Boom. There's an unholy. As soon as there's a sacred, there's a mundane. As soon as there's a high, there's a low. So if my truth is holy, what does that make your truth? If Zen Buddhism is the one true, special, magical, amazing spiritual path, what are you guys doing? Do you sort of feel it? So the division is instant when we do that. So what this isn't is a way of saying nothing matters, existential angst, forget it all, nothing's holy. Do you sort of feel it like when you were 16 writing poetry, that kind of thing? It's not that kind of emptiness. It's not that. When you first read Jean-Paul Sartre and you freaked out, yeah, it's not that kind of emptiness. It's what he's talking about. And I can't go down that road either. Emptiness is just a fancy way of saying non-separateness. No separation. And even that sounds clinical. I prefer the term intimacy. Radical, amazing intimacy. The way that my thumb and my pinky are intimate. That makes sense? They're separate. They got different jobs to do. But how intimate? They're part of the same hand. They're part of the same body. They are separate, but they are not separate. The waves and the lake, they are separate, they are not separate. you know. Me and Diane, separate, but not separate. So now it's starting to feel like, oh, right, that's the mystical tradition. I and the Father, we're different, but we're not, we're one. Oh, I get it. So this becomes the linchpin of this guy's entire teaching. And he changes the shape of Chinese Buddhism because of the way he talks about enlightenment and the way he talks about Buddha. Because he's coming from this place of, it's not apart from you. You're not it, but you're not it. And now language starts getting clumsy, and you know what I mean? It's almost comedic. It can almost become. So when he says the highest meaning, holy truth, vast emptiness, he's saying everything is connected. There's only one thing happening here, which means nothing holy, because we're not going to set aside one thing and say special, because now that makes everything else not special, and I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. Wow. It's difficult for us to, I know that holy word is difficult, but if we just translate it a little bit and play with it, if you were, as an ambassador of Earth, welcome to another planet, and said, so which of the races on your planet is the highest? You'd start to see it and go, oh, whoa. Ooh, who's the most important person? Oh, you start to feel it, right? Which one of your siblings do you love the most? Oh, I get it. Because we all want to be mom and dad's favorite. But the truth is, as soon as we do that, right? So fascinating conversation. Finally, of course, who do you think you are? Who is standing before me? I don't know. And that's not a conventional, I don't have a driver's license and I can't tell you who I am, because I can tell you who I am. I can tell you who my teacher was. I can tell you my teacher's teacher was. I know how I came here. I traveled on the reed, the whole deal. He's speaking of, I don't know mind, or don't know mind, which is prized so highly in the Zen tradition. So highly, not knowing. Not garden variety ignorance. We're not talking about that. To not know is to allow for intimacy. Right? Because our ideas, our concepts, our beliefs, our predispositions become at some point barriers, right? Isn't it Eckhart who says the last thing that's got to go is all your ideas about God? Something like that? I'm doing a bad job of paraphrasing, but at some point, it's your idea. That's what's going to get in the way. Oh, you're knowing, you think you know. Oh, sweetie, I'm sorry. Well, just come back. You'll forget more. Because the whole idea of separateness had to be learned. So the invitation is, oh, just forget that. Just forget. Okay. We're going to start moving a little more quickly now. Oh, Kathy.
How about the thought that all is holy?
Yeah.
I mean, that everything is incredibly important, incredibly loved, and incredibly holy, and incredibly, I don't even know, keep going, but I mean, so when I saw that, nothing holy, I thought, now wait a minute, I'm going to read, like everything is.
Yeah.
So incredible and awesome.
Yeah.
Bigger way to look at it.
Osho, for the folks in Collegeville, repeat a little bit of what she said.
Oh, yeah, because you guys can't hear. Oh, thank
They
you.
can't hear the question.
Right, thank you. She asked me the answer, nothing holy, couldn't that just as easily be translated as everything holy? Is that fair to say? Absolutely. Absolutely. That's where it ends up going. Where this evolves, when you fast forward about 1,000 years and you're now in Japan and Zen is now in Japan, the saying now is there's no place to spit.
Yeah. Right.
Same thing.
Right.
Like you can't find an area that is worthy of desecration or disrespect. So nothing holy, everything holy is the same. I completely agree with you. It's got a different emotional valence. So I get why he's sort of a troublemaker. He's definitely wanting to take away this guy's toy. Because you're right, he could have said everything is holy. But I think the sense here is, you know how a good teacher can, of course, see, oh, this is the thing you're hanging on to. So for this guy on this day, nothing holy is a more effective teaching. Probably. I think because he's very attached. Plus, he's the emperor. Imagine how special he felt. I mean, he is holy. So to have somebody say, nothing's holy, pal, it'd be like, what's that going to do to this guy's identity?
Yeah.
Yeah, no kidding. Did you have something?
Oh, no, I was just going to say that, but his teaching is nothing is holy, which is like we kind of live in a culture where we really propagate that, like everyone is special, everyone gets an award and an A for effort.
Yeah.
This is not that. This is not holy.
It's not even that, yeah. My teacher at Zen Center, Tim Burkett, his first book is called Nothing Holy About It, taken from this. He really loves, it's probably why I got it so much, because he's my teacher and I got so much of his infusion. But that idea of nothing special, nothing holy, the invitation is exactly where Kathy took it, actually, which is to start to see everything. Not only is everything connected because of non-separateness, but everything becomes indescribably precious beyond ideas of precious. Does that make sense? I know that this is a human experience. This isn't a Buddhist experience or even a meditative experience. I know everybody has had an experience that felt so huge that to reduce it to language, even the loftiest language, still felt like a reduction. Have we all had that? When you say to somebody, I love you, and it's the best you got, are those 3 words, but the feeling in your heart is, it's so much bigger. This is still the best I got. So I'm going to say it, but that to me feels very much like, and hopefully those of us who have, a contemplative spiritual dimension to our lives, I like to think that we've also had experiences that I suppose people would say are transcendent or something, where for even a little while, even a few seconds, the veil is lifted and you sort of see for a few breaths the world as it is. Does that make sense? I don't want to get too ooey gooey here, but when everything just sparkles and shines and you go, oh, I get it. And then whoosh, it's gone again. Okay, my capacity is small. I can only hold that. What is enduring the divine light? Is that? I learned all this stuff from Ward, but then it rolls around in my noodle and it ends up being mine, and then I attribute it to him. And I've attributed all sorts of stuff to him that he probably never said. It's the price you pay for being a teacher, right? Okay, so after his rather troublesome, or perhaps irksome, depending on who you are, conversation with the emperor, Bodhidharma then spends 9 years gazing at the wall in a cave. Woo! He's an animal. This is such a huge part of it, such a huge part of the myth. He goes away, he sets up shop inside a cave, and he stares at the wall for 9 years. Okay, so why is that story?
What did he eat?
What a good question. I assume Hostess products exclusively. because it's right, because it's what I crave during meditation retreats. I never eat these things, but somehow on day 4 of the retreat, you think, oh man, I would take a life for a ho-ho right now. So I'm assuming we're all together in that. Failing to make a favorable impression in South China, Bodhidharma is said to have traveled to the Shaolin monastery after either being refused or ejected for a short time. You can kind of imagine why. He lived in a nearby cave where he faced the wall for 9 years, not speaking for the entire time. The biographical tradition is littered with apocryphal tales about Bodhidharma's life and circumstances. In one version of the story, he is said to have fallen asleep. After 7 years of sitting, he fell asleep. And he was so angry with himself, he ripped his own eyelids off to prevent this from happening again. As his eyelids hit, he throws the eyelids out of the cave. Sorry, this is a PG-13 talk, you guys. As he throws his eyelids out of the cave, tea plants spring up. So Bodhidharma is credited for bringing tea to China. Isn't that nice? Why tea? Because, of course, it's a stimulant to help you stay awake. That may have not actually happened. And it's entirely possible that tea doesn't actually come from human eyelids. Okay. So as ridiculous as that is, and I was actually thinking tonight, oh God, Zen is full of all these irresponsibly violent stories. People cutting cats in half and ripping off arms and all this kind of stuff. And then I went, well, but the Old Testament.
We have some of those.
Okay, I guess it just ends up being bloody at some point. The reason this story is kept and the reason it's important is symbolically, he's not in the monastery. He's all by himself. Remember, he symbolizes the truth. He's the one who gets it. He's not in the temple. He's outside the temple. Right? When Christ gives a Sermon on the Mount, he's not in the synagogue. He's not in the temple. He's out there. Isn't that? Oh, that's interesting. He goes off for 40 days and 40 nights on his own. Not, he went to the retreat center and he requested the gluten-free and he really hung in there. No, he goes off on his own in the wilderness to face his demons, right? So 9 years in the cave, and of course in the cave, you don't have to be Freud to figure that out as metaphorical. What do? You go into the dark. You want to learn to meditate? I know at the beginning it's all about go to the happy place, calm blue ocean, everything's fine, that's cool. But after a while, we all know what that turns into. And we all know whether we are literally facing the wall in that room or not, we all know who we end up facing because there is only one person to face. And boy, does that start feeling like a cave on more than one occasion for many of us, for all of us, sometimes for years at a time. So I love the idea, even though it's obviously a made-up story, of somebody sitting in the dark for 9 years, and the symbol of him facing the wall of the cave, obviously, means he's only looking at himself. There's nothing else to see. And so the understanding being, when you're investigating, when you're doing the contemplative path, when you're doing the Zen path, there's only one thing you're looking at, and it ain't out there. Does that make sense? Of course it's out there, but the way to get to it is here, right? Lastly, the ripping off of the eyelids, obviously didn't happen. The symbol there is wakefulness. We're here to pay attention. We're here to pay attention. So this isn't somebody who blissed out for 9 years, or who tranced out for 9 years, or who escaped for 9 years. He went into the dark and he faced himself and he didn't blink for 9 years. So even though that's not literal, we all understand what that feels. Does that? Yep. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. To this day, if you come join us at Minnesota Zen Meditation Center, and you come into the meditation hall, we face the wall. We've been facing the wall in Soto Zen Buddhism for 1,200 years. Because of this guy, because of this story. You face the wall. That's what you're there to look at. We leave our eyes open during meditation because of this guy. Isn't that crazy? There's nothing to look at. It's a wall. Talk about stupid. Isn't religion goofy? Yeah. Keep your eyes open. Face the wall. Because after about 5 breaths, that wall becomes a mirror and there's nothing to see but you. And of course, it helps you stay awake. But symbolically, you're facing yourself. So we face the wall in Soto Zen Buddhism as a way of sitting alone together. Because we're all still in the room together. And yet, Diane's meditation is Diane's, and Ward's is Ward's, and Busho's is Busho's, because they're alone together. Isn't that interesting? We still do that because of this story. So he ends up taking a student, Huiko. All I'm going to say about Huiko is, you'll see his name at the bottom of the little reading there. All I'm going to say about him is he didn't talk for 9 years, and supposedly he refused student after student after student after student. Hey, I really want to learn. God, get lost. You get off my lawn. You young whippersnappers in your Buddhism, get off my lawn. I won't take you. So Huiko comes along and is like, I really want to be your student. I really want to learn this stuff. No, go away. I really want to learn. No, go away. It has to be the 3, the 3 S and the 3 refusals. In order to demonstrate his earnestness, to show Bodhidharma, no, I'm really friggin' serious. He cuts off his own arm and he presents his arm to Bodhidharma's way of saying, I'm not kidding. I will die if you do not take me as a student. Again, I have to hope that's an apocryphal story. It's unnecessarily R-rated. And the image, one of the images you have on your Bodhidharma handout there, is in fact Huiko standing at the door of the cave holding his own arm. Those of you who are in Collegeville, I apologize. You're not going to see the grisly. No, it's actually not grisly. You can look it up online. Why do we hang on to that story? We hang on to that story only because it's fun to tell, I guess. But you're already getting a picture of where this guy's bar is for Buddhist practice. You're starting to get it, all right? Because you already know popular Buddhism is there and has been there for a long time, and the emperor is propagating it, and he's making Buddha statues, and he's making monasteries, and he's ordaining people, and it's rock and roll, and it's becoming mainstream, right? And this guy isn't going to speak for 9 years, and he's only going to face himself in a cave. And if you want to be his student, you've got to be that serious. This is not somebody who's handing out any kind of pills, any kind of comfort. He's not offering any kind of solace. That spirit is very much alive in the Zen tradition. They don't require arm severing any longer, which I'm personally grateful for. I'm actually very attached to both of mine. But what I like about it, and I'm sure the reason the story exists is, even though it's symbolic, it expresses at some point spiritual aspiration and devotion to spiritual practice is going to cost you. Sooner or later, you're going to have to give up something really comfortable for something that's true. Sooner or later, you're going to have to give up something nice for something loving. You know the difference there, right? If you don't know the difference between nice and loving, read Rumi. Right? Roar, lion of the heart, and tear me open. This is no kidding. Compassion has teeth. Love is here to rip your house down, not just rearrange the furniture and make the flow patterns nicer. So that chop off your own arm if you're sincere is obviously metaphorical and symbolic, but it still expresses at some point you will be faced with choices. And if you're like most of us, you're actually faced with those choices thousands of times in little ways and in big ways. Does that make sense to you? Like, God, that relationship I'm in with that person that I've been in for 30 years, that's so comfortable. I've just realized it's not loving. I got a really tough decision to make between love and truth and what is comfortable. And maybe I'm not ready yet, and maybe I'm not ready yet, and then finally maybe I am ready. But do you feel the size of the surrender? And we all know this because it's in all of our traditions. What do you give up, right? Take up your cross, follow me. You know what we're eventually going to have to do with these crosses, right? You know where this is going, right? Wow. So similar parallel, do you see some of the similar threads? So when it's time for him to be done, and this is a crucial story, I'm going to end with this. He decides he is done teaching. He's going to go back to India, or he's going to disappear into the mountains, or he's going to ascend, or he's going to who knows what. But he's done. And he has, at this point in the training, said yes to 4 different students that he has been training for who knows how long. And he decides he has to hand the tradition on so that he can retire. Right? This is the beginning of the idea, the strain, the myth that is central to Zen Buddhism of lineage. The idea being the truth is transmitted, is the word that we use, transmitted. So when people ask me, oh, where did you get your training in Zen Buddhism? Well, you know, Minnesota Zen Meditation Center, but that institution doesn't ordain people, nor does it okay them to teach, nor does it say you've started, nor does it say you're done. Only your teacher does that. So there is no sort of Vatican or institutional layer in Buddhism that trains people. Only teachers train you. Does that sort of make sense? It's different than our academic model. You know, when you get your degree, you get a degree from the university. The university collectively says, she's done, she's studied all the proofs she can handle, so here's your English degree, get out of here, you rascal, right? That's conferred upon you by the entire collective wisdom of the University of Minnesota. This is much more like kind of a apprenticeship kind of model, like back in the day. I want to be a blacksmith. You hang out with a blacksmith. After 15 years, they're like, yeah, you know everything I do. You're a blacksmith now. Who'd you learn it from? She's the one who taught me. So you're only as good as your teacher, kind of thing? Which is why, again, in Zen, when somebody is, the way she did that, who's her teacher? It's the first question. I wonder who her teacher is. Does that kind of make sense? So the transmission myth starts with Bodhidharma, and therefore the idea that the truth, which cannot be written down and passed on, has to be apprehended directly. And the idea is that teacher will recognize it at some point. Isn't that weird? That feels woo-y, but that's like, eventually they go, oh yeah, there it is, I see it. Cool, you're off to the races, Mary, boom. Because they've looked and, they see. Well, it's kind of like love recognizes love. It just recognizes itself. So you go, oh, cool, you're fully baked. Out of the oven for you, you're done. And it isn't because of the number of things you memorized or the number of prostrations you did or any kind of metric of normal attainment. It's that, you've breathed that sutra long enough that I've started to see it, and now you're on your own. So the story around transmission is on your handout, and it reads as follows. For those of you up in Collegeville, Bodhidharma wished to return to India, and he called together his 4 disciples. He asked, can you each say something to demonstrate your understanding? So our first contestant, Dao Fu, steps forward and says, it is not bound by words or phrases, nor is it separate from words and phrases. This is the function of the Tao. So already, remember, this is Buddhism, and he just said the Tao. It's fused already. So that's a pretty good answer, frankly. In my eyes, that's a rock star answer. Very good. Bodhidharma says, you have attained my skin. Next one, the nun, Zhong, she steps forward and says, it is like a glorious glimpse of the realm of Buddha. Seen once, it need not be seen again. This is an even better answer. She's awesome, right? He says to her, you have attained my flesh. Third one, Dao Yu. The 4 elements are all empty. The 5 skandhas are without actual existence. That's a way of saying there's no one at home in here. There's no separate self. Not a single dharma can be grasped. No teaching can be grasped. No woman can be grasped. It's all emptiness, right? Again, good answer. Bodhidharma responds, you have attained my bones. Finally, Hueku comes forth. He bows in silence and stands back up again. You can see it coming, can't you? Like, oh, you're so good at your job. Bodhidharma responds, you have attained my marrow. Skin, flesh, bones, and marrow. You have attained my marrow, the innermost part of me. This is a whole other talk for a whole other day. It is normally seen as those are people demonstrating layers of understanding from the least sophisticated to the most sophisticated. For now, let's just have that be true. I don't know. I think it's more fun to play with that. But for now, we're going to say that that's true. Therefore, the nonverbal gesture of the bow is the highest expression of understanding. Therefore, Bodhidharma passes on his symbolic robe and bowl of Dharma succession to Hueku. So you're the guy. You get to teach now. Right? That tradition we still do. When you are... I don't want to say finished because there's no such thing. But when you get transmission, when your teacher finally says, all right, I've had enough of you, which is way closer to what it really is, ladies and gentlemen. Oh yeah, one more day with you is going to drive me up the wall, so let's just pretend you're done, okay? There's a week-long ceremony and you're forbidden from talking about it and blah, 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 blah. But you get a robe and you get a bowl. It's kind of a letdown. There's no surprise because you have to sew your own robe and it takes about a year. So it's sort of like you can see it coming. Anyway, that tradition, those symbolic objects are still honored today, all these hundreds of years later. So the essence of what is demonstrated there, the essence of his teaching, and this is said to be the core of Zen Buddhism, which even historians would agree, has probably been around as a separate stream of Buddhism since probably 500 or so. The core of everything that this tradition has handed down and taught can be summed up in these 4 lines that are also on your handout, that are attributed to Bodhidharma, who almost certainly didn't say them, but that's not the point. Zen is, or the truth is, or the way is, a special transmission outside the scriptures, not founded upon words or letters, direct pointing to one's mind, seeing into one's own true nature, and attaining Buddhahood. And I would argue, and I don't think I would get anybody who would argue with me, that every single thing we do, say, teach, or express in the sutras, or the rituals, or the liturgy, or the meditation instruction in Zen Buddhism is all there. And there's really, really a lot of emphasis placed on it is direct, words will never get there. We use them. Words will never get there, and it's you. It can only be you. It's the only thing you can ever experience is you, right? It's your taste, your smell, your touch, your hearing. That's all you got. That has to be it. That's it. That's your door. It's that. And the feeling here is it's so close. It's closer than your breath. It's closer than all of your ideas about yourself. It's closer than the closest of the close. Direct pointing, direct pointing, direct pointing. So meditation in our tradition becomes that you sit and you face the wall and realizing that that action is itself an expression of direct pointing. Yeah. So I have talked a lot tonight. There is so much more that could have been said. What I was reminded of tonight when we were doing Cloud of Unknowing, are you guys doing Cloud of Unknowing up in? Yeah, you're on the same liturgical. You guys are doing Cloud of Unknowing in.
Julian of Norwich.
I think they're doing,
Julian.
yeah.
Oh, you guys are doing Julian. Well, we were doing Cloud of Unknowing, and you guys know it. God cannot be known by thought, only through love. There's direct apprehension. Not sentimental, not attached, not grabbing on. Big L love, capital L love. To me, that's the special transmission. That's outside of all the words. That's outside of all the scriptures. There's lots of words. There's lots of scriptures. They're beautiful, they're wonderful, they're helpful. But all of us know how direct that is, how immediate that is. That's the most direct possible thing. To even describe it as direct is a reduction, right? So to me, all he really brought, the whole myth is, here's an awakened heart, here's an awakened mind, housed in a cranky body, which I appreciate as I get increasingly cranky. And yet he's still transmitting. Don't ever forget that the truth of this tradition goes beyond this tradition. Don't get caught by Zen. Leave it. It's a raft. It'll get you there and then you can leave it. When you freak out, pick it up again. It's just a thing, right? It's empty. It's not holy. Everything's holy. So don't get caught. Does that make sense? The small L love gets in the way of the big L love so often that it feels like that's all he's really telling us. You know, that's really all that was at the core of this. So for me as a 21st century practitioner, reminding myself of this crazy story and sitting facing the wall becomes an act of not only faith, that there is something beautiful in the human heart that can be known and transmitted and shared and taught, but that even the act of devoting oneself to it is it. That meditation session to me doesn't have to show up looking like peace or serenity or feeling better. Sometimes it's crappy, sometimes it's lousy. But I don't, does that make sense? You guys know what I mean. Yeah. I'm grateful for your attention. We have 5-10 minutes before we run out of time. Does anybody have questions here or in? Hey, you Collegeville guys, you got any questions up there?
Yeah, start with the letter.
We're unmuted.
We're unmuted.
We're unmuted.
Yes, you are. Aren't they? Don't they look motley? They look motley. What do you, I I'm just teasing Tom because I like him so much. Is there anything going on up there you want to know more about?
You've covered it all.
Wonderful.
I love that man. I covered it all. What else that confused you so thoroughly? It is a joy to have you with us, even virtually. I'm grateful that you're here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Be seeing you in a week or two.
I will be there in 2 weeks, my friend.
Diane and Tom.
Yeah, are you coming
Yeah.
to Bert?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're all taking.
Yeah, we're all coming.
We're all here.
Right. They're talking about this. Is it 2 weeks
Yeah.
Yeah.
from now? Golden Buddha, Golden Christ. I called it. Yeah. Do you guys know the book Living Buddha, Living Christ by Thich Nhat Hanh? That's where I thought, oh, I'm going to lift from him. He's good.
It's pretty good.
Yeah, that'll be a wonderful experience. I think we got about 3 weeks to go on that one, but join us. We would love to have you. Kathy, please.
So now that you've gotten your outfit and goal, do you ever have the temptation to go outside of what your teacher told you, or the teaching that you got? Like how expansive?
I do.
Can you finish that question, please?
Can you tell them?
Yeah, Kathy is asking me, so correct me if I'm getting this wrong. She's asking me if once one becomes transmitted, all transmission really means in the Zen tradition is you are free now to teach independently. That's really what it means.
Yeah.
Like you can now give the precepts, you can now ordain other people, you can now train students. Up until now, you were a trainee. Now you're your own jam. And you answer to no one.
They trust you.
It's complete empowerment. It's complete empowerment. So that system of complete empowerment, when only one person's got to see you and go, yep, you got it, because that transmission is complete empowerment, you can sort of see the potential for all sorts of abuses. And so the temple system in a lot of these countries that are Buddhist countries goes father to son to father to son to father to son, because the temple's a family business. And no, you've never sat in meditation, but I'm going to pass it to you because you've got the mystical thing. I'll give you the robe because that way the business stays in the family. And yeah, some of my friends who practice in Japan go, transmission is nothing. Nothing. It used to mean the way love recognizes love and a heart recognizes a heart. And now it's just like, oh yeah, we got to keep the business in the family. So I'm giving it to you. Not bad. But anyway, so this system lends itself, as you can imagine, to all sorts of abuses. What I appreciate about it is the intimacy of it. I really appreciate the intimacy of this, because the teacher to student connection, which this story exemplifies, is at the heart still, I would argue, of the Zen tradition, at least in this country. So you choose your teacher very carefully, because they're going to walk with you for a long time, at least a decade, and they're going to get to know every nook and cranny, as well they should. And it's kind of like finding a really good spiritual director. They're not going to take it easy on you. They're going to, right? And you're like, oh, thank you for pushing my chickpeas down into the soup. As you say, right? So your question is, she was asking me, since transmission, have I felt constricted by the tradition? Do I feel bound to sort of stay within what my teacher taught me and what the tradition teaches me? Or do I feel free to wander outside? Is that fair?
Yeah, like what growth, I guess.
Yeah, that's changed for me. This is just me speaking on behalf of myself. I feel much freer to wander. Much freer to wander now. Because like, okay, you're done. You did that thing. And of course, you're never done. But I recognize that my teacher's a human being who has blind spots and only saw what he saw. And therefore, seeking out other people who have understanding seems like really prudent and wise, because obviously I have things in me that he didn't see because he couldn't. So I've got a formal teacher, and I've got a spiritual director, and I've got mentors, and I've got friends, and people are like, hey, what do you think about? And what I like about it is, instead of it feeling like I've got a teacher, now I feel like I've got 7.5 billion. Everybody knows something I don't.
Everybody should teach.
And I feel much freer actually to draw from other traditions and from other teachers. It's a great question. Diane.
I actually have two questions, one short one. Does Zen have a meaning? Like the word Zen, which you said Chan?
Oh, yes.
What does that mean?
Thank you. What a good question. Diane asked what the word Zen means because on the handout it's written as Chan, C-H-A-N. So Zen is Japanese, the Japanese pronunciation of the Chinese character, the kanji, that they would pronounce Chan. And it comes from the Sanskrit jhana. And all of those words mean meditation.
Oh.
So Zen Buddhism, meditation Buddhism, which is silly because a lot of forms of Buddhism meditate. When I'm teaching the Introduction to Zen class at Zen Center, which is one of my favorite things to do, what I'm teaching to is a bunch of Americans who already have a preconceived idea of what Zen means. Because we've sort of decided it means something, you know? And so I show them a photograph. It's so Zen, exactly. I show them a photograph of the 2019 electric Harley Davidson motorcycle. It's brand new, you guys. The tagline is, "Get a taste of Zen." And I'm like, wow, that's way different than what we're doing. We've been doing it like the wrong, boring way for a long time. This is way cooler than what we're doing. And then I remind them that down the street at the coffee shop at Dunn Brothers is a little rack, a little metal rack where all the syrups go. You know, the syrups that they add to your, you know, to your latte that says, "Taste the Zen." So we have no idea what the word Zen means in this country, but we have decided that it means definitely good, maybe fast and dangerous, perhaps tasty, maybe groovy, maybe calm. I don't know. Just need meditation. What was the second one?
The second question, you were talking about your teacher and whether, do you still see your teacher, or is there isn't a,
I do.
there isn't like a cutoff?
No, not necessarily. It could be. It could be. It isn't unusual in the Zen tradition to... Oh, thank you. She asked me if I'm still in a relationship with my teacher and if after formal training is completed, if after transmission, you're expected to still be in contact, or are you free to fly, essentially? And either is fine. In my particular case, because our temple, our center, has more than one teacher, we still kind of teach and take turns as kind of a cadre. It's just easier. What's much more typical is one teacher, one temple. That's pretty much roughly the model is once you get transmission and you're independent, off you go. Found your own temple, get your own students, and then you transmit one of them, and then off they go, found your own.
In the US?
In the US, yeah. So having a two-teacher system isn't unheard of, but we have 7 at MCMC. And when other people come in, you know, other Zen students are like, "You guys have 7 teachers? That's madness." I'm like, yes. It's a hot dish. Everything's mixed together. It's Minnesotan. I know we're getting short on time. Did you have something or no?
Oh, I was just thinking, you know, in terms of myth, you know, the Bodhidharma comes bearing the good news, right?
Definitely.
Somebody else brought the good news and he was killed. You know, the myth says he was killed, but this guy wasn't.
No, he wasn't.
And that just kind of like, huh, if I'd have been the emperor and heard this, I might have said, off with your head.
Yeah.
So it's just interesting how the storyline is different.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
She's talking about how the Bodhidharma kind of represents, it's almost like the 3 wise men and Jesus in one in a weird way. Like you're the divine messenger, but you're also the messenger of the divine messenger. Right. How even though he kind of mouthed off a little bit to the emperor, he wasn't. And yeah, that is interesting to me. I don't know if him going into the cave was him being exiled. I think this is historical. Most historians agree, and there are certainly lots of Buddhist scriptures that remind us that attempts on the Buddha's life were made regularly. Regularly, they were trying to kill him. His cousin, he had a jealous cousin who was always trying to kill him. And he was not successful. He lived to a ripe old age. And I've always thought the same thing, like, why didn't they kill Buddha? Considering what he was teaching at that time and letting in untouchables and letting in women and doing stuff that's like, you get killed for stuff like that. How are you getting away with this? It is a little bit of a different story. Instead of born into nothing and becoming a king, he's born as a king and he renounces and becomes nothing. There's an interesting twist in kind of the Christ myth there. And instead of being caught and killed, he dies of eating bad pork. There's not a lot of romance there. Should have been a Jew. The only thing I can think of, and I'll let you guys go after this. The only thing I can think of, and this actually makes a lot of sense from a Buddhist point of view, is because so much emphasis, and this is a fundamental difference from traditions, because there's so much emphasis placed on the Buddha being a dude. He lived as a human. He was born as a human. He died as a human. No magic. No divine intervention. No, this is a human being who woke up. That's emphasized so strongly at the beginning, and then again in Zen, because that way, the idea being it's accessible to all of you because he wasn't born special. He just woke up like you can wake up. And so it doesn't then depend on caste or gender or financial blah, 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 or even the finger of the divine coming down and going, this is my son in whom I am. It's like, nope, we all get to sit underneath trees and we all have the potential for awakening. And the universality of the invitation to enlightenment is central to Buddhism. And again, that's one of the things that by all rights should have gotten them killed, because that caste system says the Brahmins have got access to this stuff and you folks don't. So he said, oh no, we all have access. Pretty dangerous. You know? All right, you guys, I know I've taken up all of oh, thank you.